The rain fell like judgment on Red Hollow. It sluiced down the cracked facades of the buildings, turned the dirt to muck, and beat down hats and tempers alike. Townsfolk gathered in the square anyway, drawn by the promise of blood or barter. An auction was always worth braving the weather, especially when the goods were alive. They dragged the cowboy up onto the wooden platform like he weighed nothing, though the bruises on the men who'd caught him suggested otherwise. He was barefoot, wrists bound in iron, shirt torn down the back and soaked dark with dried blood. He didn't resist, didn't speak. Just stood there in the downpour, staring past the crowd with eyes like frozen iron. Wade Mercer. That was the name called out, though no one was certain if it was his or one he'd stolen. Accused of murder, theft, desertion. Once a scout for the Union. Now a bounty with no buyer. The war had ended, but men like him didn't return home. They floated west, broken and dangerous. The crowd murmured. A few men jeered, one spat at the platform. Evelyn Carver didn't speak. She stood at the back of the crowd beneath a wide black hat and oilskin cloak, water running off her like she was carved from stone. The townsfolk barely noticed her anymore, except to whisper rumors when she passed, about her ranch, about her husband, about what she'd lost and how tightly she clung to what little remained. The auctioneer shouted over the storm. Who'll take him? Strong back, sharp eye. Might fetch game or guard your land. Or maybe you just want justice. Starting at $30. No one answered. A dog barked. A drunk shouted something unintelligible. 20, then. Come now, ain't he worth $20 alive? Still nothing. The war had left behind too many broken men, and folks were tired of burying strangers. Evelyn stepped forward. 10. Heads turned. The auctioneer blinked. Pardon? I said 10. Laughter rippled through the crowd. You buying a bodyguard or a bedwarmer? Someone called. Evelyn ignored them. The auctioneer scratched his head. Sold, I suppose. The keys were tossed to her with a shrug. She didn't flinch when they landed at her feet. The man, Wade, watched her, rain-cutting lines through the grime on his face. His eyes didn't hold thanks. Only a quiet, unreadable warning. He didn't speak as she unlocked the shackles and gestured toward the wagon waiting at the edge of town. He climbed into the back without a word. The ride back to Hollow Creek Ranch was silent. Wade sat in the open bed of the wagon, unshackled but unmoving. Evelyn didn't glance back. The horses knew the way, even with the roads near impassable. Mud splashed up over the wheels, and the wind howled through the trees like ghosts with unfinished stories. The ranch appeared like a scar on the land. Weather-beaten, lean, and barely standing. Half the fence was down, the barn sagging under its own weight, and the house looked abandoned but for the smoke that still rose from the chimney. She pulled the wagon to a halt and climbed down. Barn's there, she said, without turning. There's hay, water. Stove inside if you can fix it. He didn't move. I didn't buy you to chain you, she added. But I will if I have to. He slid off the wagon and limped toward the barn. She didn't follow. Night fell fast. Inside the house, Evelyn lit one lamp and set out a plate of cornbread and cold beans. She stared at it a long while, then took it to the barn. He was sitting in the straw, his back against a support beam, his eyes closed. She placed the plate beside him and stood there, silhouetted by the doorway. I don't care what you did, she said. He opened one eye. You're here now. That's what matters. He said nothing. She turned to leave, then paused. Sleep with one eye open, she said. Not because I don't trust you. Because I don't trust anyone. She left the barn and bolted the door from the outside. Not to keep him in, but to keep everything else out. In the days that followed, he worked. He didn't speak, but he worked. Fixed the fence. Cleared brush. Dug out the collapsed garden rows. His movements were deliberate, efficient. He favored his left leg, and one arm didn't lift right, but he never stopped. Not even when the rain turned to sleet. Evelyn watched him from the porch with a rifle across her knees. She didn't know what to make of him. He didn't look at her the way other men did. Not with hunger or pity. He looked through her, like she was smoke. One morning, she found him stitching a broken harness with thread from his own coat. She handed him a biscuit without speaking. He took it, nodded once, and kept sewing. It was the closest thing to a conversation they'd had. The ranch began to show signs of life again. A chicken laid eggs. The pump started working after he replaced the rusted joint. Evelyn repaired the window shutters, her hands calloused and bleeding but steady. At night, she sat by the fire and read aloud from an old book of sermons, though she no longer believed in any God. On the third night, a scream split the air. Evelyn ran from the house, rifle raised. A foal had gotten stuck in the creek bed, its legs tangled in root and stone. The mother neighed frantically from the pen. Evelyn slid into the mud, grabbing the foal's legs, pulling with everything she had. The cold was a vice on her lungs. The mud sucked at her boots. Wade appeared without warning. He grabbed the foal's torso, braced against a rock, and heaved. The foal came free in a rush of mud and water, both of them falling backward. Evelyn collapsed beside it, gasping. Wade stood. Offered his hand. She stared at it. Took it. That night, they didn't speak. But when she returned to the barn later with fresh bandages for his hand, she found him awake. I saved your life, she said, wrapping the cloth tight. He didn't argue. I didn't have to. Still, he was silent. She sat back on her heels, looking at him in the dim lamplight. Tell me something, she said. He blinked. Why didn't you run? He hesitated. There's nowhere to go, he said finally, voice rough as gravel. She studied him. Same, she said. She stood, moved to the door. You got a name? Wade. She nodded once. Don't steal from me, Wade. Don't lie. Don't touch me unless I say. And if you try to run, I'll shoot. I believe you. She started to leave, but paused again. I saved you, she said. Now you save me. He frowned. From what? She didn't answer. The wind howled louder outside, slamming into the walls like fists. She left the barn and didn't bolt the door this time. Inside the house, she sat by the fire, holding her late husband's rifle in her lap. Not for protection, just for memory. Her fingers traced the initials carved into the stock, the ones she used to look at with something like hope. Now they meant nothing. She'd bought a man from the dirt, same as a broken plow or rusted nail. But when she looked into his eyes, something inside her flinched. Because she'd seen the same thing in her own reflection. A ghost that refused to lie down. And that scared her more than anything outside those walls. The storm didn't let up for days. It pounded the land, stripped branches, flooded the road, and soaked the bones of every creature that hadn't yet frozen. But inside Hollow Creek Ranch, something small began to thaw. And in the barn, a man who'd once stopped caring whether he lived or died now found himself listening, for footsteps on the porch. For a voice in the dark. For a reason not to vanish. The wind screamed against the eaves. But neither of them moved. Wade was chopping wood when the first rider crested the hill. He felt it more than saw it, a shift in the wind, a silence among the birds, that old scout's instinct crawling up his spine like a warning. He stood still, axe held low, breath held tighter. The rider was distant but moving fast, silhouetted by the bleak morning sun. Dust curled behind the hooves like smoke from a slow fire. Evelyn stepped out from the house, rifle slung over her shoulder. She didn't say anything. Just nodded at Wade, who wiped his hands and followed her down to the gate. The rider slowed as he approached, a wiry man with eyes too small for his face and a grin too wide to trust. His coat bore the colors of no army, just dust and faded leather, but Wade saw the knife tucked at his belt, the revolver on his hip, the tattoos on his knuckles, markers of the Hell Hollow gang, or what was left of it since the war broke their numbers and scattered them across the frontier. Well, now, the man drawled, tipping his hat toward Evelyn. Didn't expect to find a lady holding down this place all on her own. She's not, Wade said, stepping beside her. The man glanced at him, smile faltering for half a second before returning. Friend of yours? Works the land, Evelyn said. That's all. The rider's grin soured. Funny. He looks an awful lot like a man I saw on a wanted poster in Abilene. Said he deserted after killing 2 lieutenants. Wade's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. You come here for gossip? Evelyn asked flatly. No, ma'am. Came with a warning. He leaned forward in the saddle, voice dropping. 3 days north of here, an outpost got hit. 2 ranchers dead, 5 gone missing. Cattle taken. Tracks pointed south. Wade's eyes narrowed. That's gang work. Could be, the rider said. Could be ghosts. Hard to tell these days. Folks are scared. And maybe you two want to ride out for a few days. Just until the dust settles. Why? Evelyn asked. Because I don't like burying folks who didn't ask to die. He turned his horse without another word and galloped off, leaving only hoofprints and unease behind. That night, Wade checked the barn doors 3 times. He paced the property line with a lantern, boots sinking into thawing mud, heart thumping like it used to in the deep woods before a raid. But this wasn't war, not the kind with flags and bugles. This was worse. This was lawless. Inside, Evelyn sat at the kitchen table, nursing a chipped cup of coffee that had gone cold. Her fingers drummed lightly, rhythmically, against the wood. She'd looked into the dark before and dared it to blink. But tonight, she looked tired. He stood in the doorway. You believe him? I believe anyone desperate enough to lie for nothing. He stepped in, sat across from her. He knew my face. Doesn't matter. You're here. It matters. She looked up at him, slow and searching. You didn't do what they say, did you? His silence held weight. I did worse, he said. She didn't flinch. You think I haven't done things? She asked. To keep this land, to keep food in my mouth and bullets in the chamber? I don't think about you like that. Then you don't know me. He looked away. The fire cracked, casting long shadows across the floorboards. I lost my husband on this land, she said quietly. Not to war. Not to fever. But to men who wanted what we had. They hung him from the barn rafter and waited for me to come home. I buried him before the sun came up. Wade stared at her. I saved you because I couldn't save him. She stood, gripping the table edge. But I won't lose it again. I won't lose this place. Or myself. Wade rose, slow and steady. Then we stand. She nodded once, barely. They fortified the ranch over the next 2 days. Boards nailed over windows. Traps laid along the northern fence. Evelyn set snares in the ravine. Wade climbed the ridge and spotted smoke far off on the horizon, too much for one campfire. They both knew it was coming. That night, she came to the barn with 2 blankets. Don't make it a thing, she said, handing one over. Just too cold not to be practical. He didn't argue. He laid the blanket on the hay beside his usual spot and sat with his back against the beam. She didn't leave. She sat opposite him, cross-legged, arms wrapped tight around her chest. I used to think the land was haunted, she said. It is, Wade replied. They both looked at each other in the dim, flickering light. There are bones in the creek bed. Under the garden. Men and beasts alike. I don't mean that, she said. I mean the kind of haunting that follows you. Guilt. Regret. What ifs. Wade was quiet. I saw a boy once, he said. Couldn't have been older than 12. We were scouting near the Rio Grande. Someone called out, he ran. Maybe he had food, maybe just fear. I pulled the trigger before I saw his face. She stared at him. Not with horror, only knowing. I never told anyone, he said. Now you have. Silence. Then, thank you. She said it like a wound. Like it cost something. He didn't ask why. In the early hours, gunshots echoed across the ridge. Wade was already moving. Rifle in hand, boots tied, breath steady. Evelyn followed, shotgun slung over her shoulder, coat flying behind her like a black flag. Smoke curled from the tree line. 3 riders, not far now. One with a torch, another with a rope swinging from his belt. Wade knelt behind the fence and counted their footsteps. Evelyn flanked wide, silent and sure. The men slowed as they neared the barn. You think she's sleepin'? One asked, voice greasy. Don't matter. Ain't her we want, another said. It's the horse, the tools, the land. The third laughed. If she's still breathin', all the better. Wade moved like a shadow. One shot dropped the torchbearer. Evelyn's blast caught the second in the leg, sent him screaming into the dark. The third turned to run. He didn't make it. Wade caught him at the edge of the field, slammed him to the dirt, rifle to his throat. You hell hollow? The man choked on blood and fear. Used to be. We all used to be. Who sent you? None left to send. We're just hungry. Wade stared at him a long time. Tell your ghosts they picked the wrong land, he said. Then he let him go. Evelyn stood over the dead with a look Wade couldn't read. She nudged one body with her boot. Blood soaked into the soil. This land's been thirsty a long time, she muttered. They buried the bodies behind the barn, beneath the cottonwood tree that had never bloomed. Neither of them spoke during the work. After, Wade leaned on the shovel and looked out at the hills. There'll be more. I know. You could leave. Head east. Find safety. She scoffed. Safety's an idea men invented so they could charge you for it. He looked at her. Why me? She hesitated. I don't know, she said finally. But I saw something in you. Something just as lost as me. He didn't argue. She turned away. But before she stepped into the house, she said over her shoulder. Stay alive. That's your only job. He stayed awake that night. Rifle by his side. Watching the stars. The next morning, a crow landed on the windowsill. It cawed once, then flew off. Another warning. And so the land stayed quiet, but not still. Like a breath held in a dying man's chest. Waiting. The wind shifted at dawn, and with it came the stench of smoke and rot. Wade stood on the ridge above Hollow Creek, peering through the haze. A trail of ash stretched down from the north, curling like a black vein into the heart of the valley. The trees were too still. The birds too quiet. He'd been a soldier long enough to know what it meant. They were coming. Not a handful of hungry men this time. Dozens, maybe more. Starving remnants of shattered gangs, deserters, drifters who'd tasted violence and found it sweeter than bread. And someone had united them, drawn them in with promises of easy prey. This wasn't about cattle or tools. It was about finishing what the war never did, wiping clean the land and calling it their own. He turned back toward the ranch. Evelyn was already in the corral, fitting iron plates to the gates. They're close, he said. I know. How long before they reach us? She looked toward the tree line. A day. Maybe less. There was no panic in her. Only focus. Determination like tempered steel. He dropped his rifle beside the fence post and helped her hoist the last plank into place. Their hands brushed briefly, rough against rough. A flicker of something passed between them. Not love. Not yet. But the gravity of survival shared in silence. By noon, they'd turned the ranch into a fortress. The barn doors had been reinforced with scavenged hinges from the broken windmill. Chicken wire covered the windows. Barrels of water lined the walls. Ammunition was counted twice, then again. Not much. Just enough to make each shot matter. Wade pulled out a map and spread it across the table inside the house. There's a bluff to the east, he said, tracing the ridgeline with his finger. They'll try to flank us there. I've laid traps, Evelyn replied. Baited the edge with salted meat. He raised an eyebrow. Smart. I've had time to learn. He nodded, his mind already sketching firing positions, fallback routes, blind spots. Years ago, he might have commanded a squad from a hill like this. Now it was just the two of them, and a homestead barely held together by will and lumber. That night, as the sun bled out behind the hills, a horn sounded in the distance. Not a call for retreat. A challenge. Wade's fingers tightened around his rifle. Evelyn stood at the window, lips pressed thin. They want us scared, he said. I've lived through worse. He glanced at her. Have you? She looked away, and for once, said nothing. At midnight, the first shots rang out. Sharp cracks echoed across the valley as figures moved in the dark, darting between trees and ditches. Wade took position at the west fence, dropping 2 men in quick succession. Evelyn crouched behind a crate near the root cellar, firing methodically, each pull of the trigger as precise as a sewing stitch. They moved like a machine, silent, grim, relentless. A lantern exploded against the barn, flame licking up the side before Wade knocked it loose with a shot. Smoke billowed, glowing red against the night sky. Then came the yelling, half command, half chaos, as the attackers surged forward. A man vaulted the fence. Evelyn dropped him with a blast from her shotgun. Another ducked past Wade's shot and swung a blade, catching his side. Pain flared, but Wade spun and cracked the man's skull with the butt of his rifle. He collapsed, breath ragged. Blood soaked his shirt, hot and sticky. Evelyn grabbed him by the collar, dragging him back behind the water barrels. Hold still, she hissed, pressing a cloth to the wound. He grunted. Just a scratch. You're a bad liar. So are you. She smiled, bitter and fleeting. You always this calm under fire? Only when I've got something worth dying for. Their eyes locked. There was a flicker of something raw, unspoken, burning beneath the surface. But there was no time for it. Gunfire cracked overhead. The roof groaned under the weight of men trying to climb it. Wade shoved himself up, pain flaring, and fired through the rafters. 2 thuds hit the ground, followed by silence. Then came the lull. That strange, terrifying quiet between storms. They limped out together, surveying the aftermath. Bodies sprawled across the field. Smoke curled from the barn roof. The chickens were gone. The pig pen had been torn open. But the house stood. The walls held. For now. Evelyn leaned against the fence, shoulders sagging. I'm running out of shells, she murmured. We've got one more fight in us. He stepped closer, bandage tight around his waist. But we need help. There is no one. There's one, he said. She looked up sharply. You mean him? The man in the hills. The one who watches but never speaks. You think he'll come? He came the night I was sold, Wade said. He's always watching. I don't trust ghosts. I don't think he's a ghost. She hesitated. Then nodded once. Go. Wade mounted the last horse and rode. Blood seeped down his ribs, and every hoofbeat was a hammer against his bones, but he didn't stop. He rode hard, through the dark woods where the air smelled like moss and old fire. He found the cave just before dawn, hidden behind a curtain of thorns. He dismounted, stumbled forward. I know you're there, he called. Nothing. I need your help. The silence stretched. I know what you did that night. I saw you pull that boy from the wreck. You left before anyone thanked you. A shadow moved. Then a voice, deep and weathered, you bring war to my land. I bring warning. The figure stepped into the light. A tall man with skin like worn leather, hair braided with bone and feather. Eyes dark as ash, but not cruel. Just tired. He held a spear in one hand, a bow slung over his back. They come for your woman? He asked. They come for the land. And you would die for it? Yes. The man studied him. You carry shame, he said. I earned it. A long silence. Then the man nodded. At dusk, I come. Wade rode back on legs that barely held him, fever in his veins. He arrived as the sun dipped low, casting the valley in copper and crimson. Evelyn rushed out, catching him before he fell. "I found him," he murmured. She laid him on the floor, pressing cool cloths to his forehead. Outside, the shadows moved again. Not enemies this time, but a sentinel. The stranger from the hills. He stood on the ridge as twilight fell, bow in hand, eyes scanning the tree line. And behind him, others. Silent. Hidden. Watching. Waiting. The siege would come again. But Hollow Creek was no longer alone. Smoke hung like a curtain over Hollow Creek, thick and bitter, as though the earth itself had scorched its tongue and now grumbled in silence. The air was heavy with soot and the stench of blood, but under it all, beneath the ruin and gunpowder and grief, there remained a whisper of something else, life. Evelyn stood at the edge of the barnyard, boots crusted with dried mud and ash, a single horseshoe gripped in her fingers. Wade was behind her, hunched over the corral fence, breath short and wheezing through bruised ribs, but upright. Alive. The stranger from the hills, Ronan, as he had finally offered, moved through the wreckage like a shadow among ghosts. He spoke little, though when he did, his words carried the weight of things older than the ranch, older than the settlers who had tried to tame this land. With him had come 5 others, stoic, silent, sharp-eyed, drifters or perhaps kin, drawn by loyalty or debt. They'd come not for coin, not for thanks, but for principle. For balance. They had arrived the night before the second wave. What followed was no battle. It was a reckoning. Traps set by Evelyn and sharpened by Ronan's cunning had turned the land into a graveyard of steel. Crossfire from hidden gullies and elevated barrels thinned the attackers before they ever reached the fence. Arrows hissed like serpents through the trees, striking with eerie precision. Those who pushed through found Wade, half dead but unyielding, his rifle barking thunder in the fog. And at the center of it all, Evelyn, barehanded once her shells ran dry, swinging a broken fence post like a scythe, teeth bared, eyes fierce with fire and fury. When the sun rose, the siege had ended. Now, in the quiet, they waited. "They'll send more," Wade said, breaking the silence. Evelyn didn't turn. "I know. Maybe not tomorrow. Maybe not for a week. But they'll come. They always do." She looked at the horseshoe, rubbed her thumb along its edge. "Why didn't you leave?" she asked quietly. Wade limped toward her, the crunch of charred soil beneath his boot. "You saved me," he said. "No one ever did that before. Not without asking for something in return." She turned then, slowly. Her face was streaked with ash and dried blood, but her eyes were clear. "I didn't save you to be owed. I know. But I owe you anyway." She swallowed. "So what now?" "We rebuild." The word tasted strange, almost foreign, yet it hung there between them with a weight that felt real. Rebuild. As if such a thing could be done with splintered wood and empty hands. Ronan approached from the tree lean, a dead coyote slung over his shoulder. He dropped it wordlessly by the fire pit and crouched to skin it, blade moving with reverent efficiency. "You staying?" Wade asked. "For a time." "You believe they'll return?" "I believe the fire still burns in men's hearts," Ronan replied. "Greed doesn't sleep. It only waits." Wade nodded, and for a moment, nothing else needed to be said. As the days passed, the ranch began to shift. Charred beams were hauled down and replaced. The roof patched with canvas and tar. Water barrels refilled. Evelyn's garden, trampled during the siege, was replanted row by row, tomatoes, squash, and onions returned to the earth like offerings. They buried the dead out past the cottonwood grove. Enemies and allies alike. No stones, no names, only the dirt and a silence that said enough. At night, they sat by the hearth, the fire casting long shadows across the walls. Wade's voice, once hoarse from smoke, grew steadier as he told stories, of Tennessee, of cavalry days, of the one time he'd tried baking bread and nearly burned down a fort. Evelyn laughed for the first time in what felt like a decade. "You're terrible at this," she said, sipping her tea. "I never claimed otherwise." Ronan sat nearby, mending a bowstring, but there was a twitch of his lips that might have been amusement. The trust between them all deepened, not through grand gestures, but through the slow rituals of survival. Passing tools. Sharing rainwater. Watching each other's backs as they walked the property. Sometimes words were unnecessary. A glance, a nod, a shared look at the hills was enough. But the land had a long memory. One morning, a single rider crested the ridge. He wore Union blue, faded and stained. A scout's cap. And on his hip, the glint of an officer's revolver. Wade met him halfway up the slope, rifle slung but not forgotten. The man introduced himself as Lieutenant Mason. Said he was with a detachment out of St. Louis, part of a new initiative to reclaim law and order in frontier territory. Wade listened carefully. Measured every word. "You looking to help or to claim?" Mason hesitated. "Depends on who's asking." "I am." The lieutenant shifted in his saddle. We heard reports. A group of marauders. Burned outposts. Bodies along the river. You responsible for cleaning that up? Wade didn't answer right away. No one came to help when it started, he said. We cleaned it up because we had to. Mason studied him. There's talk of land grants. Government's interested in resettling this region. With the right men in charge. Wade bristled. You'll get no claim here. It's not just your land, Mason said flatly. No. It's not. It's hers. He nodded toward the house. Mason turned in the saddle, gaze following the line of smoke from the chimney. Then maybe I'll speak with her. You'll do so respectfully, Wade warned. Or not at all. Mason gave a tight nod and turned his horse, riding off with a trail of dust in his wake. Later, Evelyn found Wade leaning against the porch, jaw set tight. What did he want? To see if we were ready to be pushed. And? He knows better now. She stood beside him, eyes scanning the hills. I don't want more soldiers. Or laws. Or cities. I want to plant onions and watch them grow. He looked at her, quiet for a long time. Then, you still wearing that horseshoe? She reached into her pocket and pulled it out, polished now, strung on a piece of rawhide. I think it's lucky. He chuckled softly. For who? Maybe both of us. In the weeks that followed, others came. Some were widows. Some were war orphans. Some had nothing left but the clothes on their backs. And somehow, they found Hollow Creek. As if word traveled not on letters but on wind and fire. Evelyn didn't turn them away. They built tents, lean-tos, and then cabins. They plowed more land. Dug irrigation ditches. Wade showed the young men how to trap. Ronan taught them to listen to the trees. Evelyn taught them to survive. No one called her ma'am. They called her Evelyn, or boss. Or simply, the one who saved us. And at night, as fire crackled and voices rose in tired laughter, Wade would glance her way and feel something stir in him that was older than war. Older than pain. Something he didn't have a name for, but recognized all the same. One evening, just as twilight melted into stars, Evelyn sat beside him on the porch. You still think I saved you? She asked. He turned to her. More than once. She nodded, slow and quiet. Then save me now, she said. Like I saved you. Don't let me carry it all alone. Wade didn't speak. He simply reached out, took her hand in his, and held it there. Not as a promise. But as proof. The fire still burned.